Lots of people contributed to this presentation. I asked for recollections of projects, both big and small. Some of the cases played out quickly, some took years, some are still ongoing. We compiled the suggestions and details our colleagues shared, then searched the archives of the Historical Society, relying especially on reporting from the Pacifica Tribune. Most of the images you will see are from these contemporaneous accounts. Scenic Pacifica. We have done it. Here is our beautiful city. Look at all the open space and the wide vistas. But it did not just happen, and it wasn't easy. All of the plans you will see today were proposed, but they were not built. A few were drastically reduced. This is the layout I'm going to use in this presentation. The aerial map from Google Earth delineates by the aqua line most of the boundaries for the city of Pacifica. The red pin is the location of the project, in this case, Portola Beach. After I explain a bit of detail about each proposed project, we'll return to this view to see the scale of the proposed development, and then we'll move on through our historical story. This ill-fated project raised an issue, unsettled at the time, of private versus public ownership of the beach. In 1962, Pacifica investigated acquiring Pedro Beach, now a part of our Pacifica State Beach in Lindamar, for an estimated price tag of $145,000. In 1965, the city considered buying all of Pacifica's beaches for $1.8 million using taxpayer funds. This public ownership by the city was soundly rejected by a vote of citizens who did not want to pay for the necessary bond measure. Later that year, a plan to privatize the north section of the beach was presented to the Planning Commission. A rendering is shown here. To be called Portola Beach, it included high-rise towers for a business center and a hotel, a convention center, ground-level shops, and several hundred apartment units. A December 1969 Pacifica Tribune article stated that it was expected to be adopted and that the developer was ready to go. But other currents were moving. In 1970, California Assemblyman Leo Ryan co-sponsored a bill proposing public ownership of the coast, with provisions to exert some control of development. A new Coastal Development and Conservation Commission would require coastal communities to plan what was built on beachside property within 1 mile of the sea. Standards would be established and enforced for both private and public development. This vision came into being in 1972 with the California Coastal Act creating the Coastal Commission. The Quarry. This area is next because its story starts in 1962, but the most recent proposal was voted on in 2016, and plans for the site are still not settled. The Quarry has a unique requirement for a public vote when residential housing is being proposed. This ordinance was adopted into the municipal code when the area was rezoned in 1983 from agricultural to commercial. Interestingly, no vote is required for future zoning changes, and the overlay for the Hillside Preservation Ordinance stayed in place. Only this one condition triggers a vote. This stipulation has often been used, as we will see. In 1962, Ken Royce requested the city rezone 90 acres for garden apartments and 76 acres for more than 400 homes. By 1973, Ideal Cement Company's mining permit was expiring, and the company was under pressure by the Central California Coastal Commission to close the quarry. They considered a shopping center and residential complex in 20-story towers on the hills. Next, they proposed an offshore marina breakwater with a shopping center, hotel, and restaurants. They proposed to donate 8 of the 76 acres to the city to sweeten the deal. The owner fell out of favor for bulldozing Calera Creek when his permit only allowed removing weeds. A second developer who specialized in big box commercial projects suggested mixed use with shopping and residences. In 1993, when the proposal was put to a public vote, Measure A failed. The city of Pacifica bought part of the land in 1999 for a wastewater treatment plant and agreed to serve as redevelopment agent for the 2 new developers. 2002 was a busy year for the quarry. Pacificans for Sustainable Development was active in the fight of the next iteration. Measure E was massive for 315 houses, stores, restaurants, and a hotel, and it lost by a 2-to-1 margin. 2 members of the City Council who supported E were voted out. The land changed hands again. This plan extended well into the hills, went to a vote in 2006 as Measure L, and also was not approved. The present owner, Paul Hule, offered a 188-room hotel and 12 2,400-square-foot bungalows with a quarry village of 206 residential units and 2-story commercial spaces, all while preserving 75% as open space. As before, since the plan proposed residential units, a ballot measure was required, and in 2016 Measure W was voted down. Recently, the city has offered to work with Mr. Hule to prepare a quarry site-specific plan. However, he may also benefit from an application submitted to the Army Corps of Engineers, placing the land in a mitigation bank, agreeing to pay for reclamation of the site in exchange for valuable development rights elsewhere. Stay tuned, folks. I-380 was constructed in the 1970s. Geographical isolation of the coast side led, as early as 1963, to discussions of where to put a good, safe east-west road. By 1971, I-380 seemed like the solution. Caltrans planned to extend it west to Highway 1 in Pacifica and was ready to roll. But the 1970 California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, would require archaeological and geological studies. Timitac, an Ohlone village near the sewage treatment plant, was a state archaeological site, and the San Andreas Fault crossed the path. Citizen resistance was mounted by Keep Pacifica Scenic and by a joint Pacifica-San Bruno group called Sane Transportation on the Peninsula 380, which wins the prize for the best acronym, Stop 380. With all these hurdles, Caltrans scrapped the Pacifica extension in 1979 and recommended improving Sharp Park Road instead. Soon afterwards, our city council approved widening Sharp Park Road, and that was the end of one of the longest and most contentious of Pacifica's many controversies. Interestingly, the California Streets and Highway Code still legally defines Route 380 as, quote, from Route 1 near Pacifica to Route 280 in San Bruno, unquote. We better stay vigilant. Milagro Ridge is another protracted case with shrinking developer goals. In 1971, Challenge Homes, an Odsted legacy, proposed 4 to 5 high-rise apartment buildings north of Good Shepherds and south of Pacific Manor, uphill from Oceana Boulevard. The developers actually began grading without any approval. By 1980, 45 acres were sold, and the new owner had a plan for 238 condo townhouses to be built over a period of 10 years. Citizen groups, Pacificans United to Save Our Hills, PUSH, and Concerned Manor Residents, CMR, resisted based on traffic and perhaps the extensive grading. 2 years later, this proposal was revised down to 244 townhouses in a commercial area downslope on Oceana Boulevard. Friends of Pacifica joined the effort. Adjacent to the proposed project area, 323 hilltop acres of county park was added to the GGNRA in 1988. This area contained both Mission Blue and San Bruno elfin butterflies, raising the concern for endangered species in this project area. There was public support for adding this project to GGNRA, and also a push to allow public access here to the GGNRA land. Feeling their chances slipping away, developers scaled down to only 63 homes on 13 acres, proposing to donate 65% of the land to GGNRA. City Council approved this and sent it to a vote that was required to amend the 1980 General Plan. That's the one we still have. Measure A failed in 1995. The developer claimed a taking and sued the city. On appeal, the California State Supreme Court refused to hear the case, so the ruling of the Court of Appeals stood. This was ruled not to be a taking because no proposal was ever submitted that fit the existing zoning requirements, only plans requiring a zoning variance. This decision exemplifies the importance of an up-to-date general plan, since it specifies zoning, among many other things. In March 2006, two more plans revised the number of proposed houses from 40 to 23 single-family homes and two commercial buildings fronting Oceana, known as Connemara. These were built, and 80% of the land went to GGNRA, including public access and parking on the western side of the park. The scale of the developers' proposals decreased over time. Both the total homes and occupied area in acres declined in response to citizen activism. By 1972, there were two serious proposals for a marina in Pacifica. One would have excavated a basin in the flatland next to the Rockaway Quarry. The other would have been located just behind the Pedro Point Shopping Center. Engineering drawings existed for both sites, and a formal request for $6 million to develop the quarry site was working its way through the system. However, the California Coastal Act passed that year, giving regulatory oversight of the coastline to the Coastal Commission. The marina plans were shelved. In a January 2001 headline, the Tribune exclaimed, "Maury Point fire sale," and called this site, quote, "ground zero for Pacifica's environmental community," unquote. It began in 1973 with Point Pacifica, a 258-acre proposal including Maury Point and Rockaway Beach and the quarry. This sparked formation of the Friends of Pacifica. An evolving series of plans were proposed from 1980 to 1994, variously including 238 condos, 60 detached homes, a 50-room inn, 2 restaurants, a commercial center, and an equestrian center. In 1984, Measure C was put to a vote in which the city, required by law to put to the public any residential plan, proposed to change the zoning to permit this multi-use project. Measure C passed, but was challenged in court by new group Pacificans for Maury Point, charging the city did not follow its own regulations or state environmental laws. In 1991, a revised project dropped 60 houses and added a golf course, with a concession to San Francisco garter snake habitat, but it was met by expiring permits and pressures from the 1972 Hillside Preservation Ordinance. In 92, Maury Point Development, Inc. withdrew all proposals in bankruptcy, accusing the council of now obstructing them. Proposition 180, the 1994 California Parks and Wildlife Bond Act, passed, allowing the city to use a source of state funding to acquire land for public parkland, coastal areas, and wildlife habitat. This eventually provided the final chapter of this saga, but not before one last gamble. Did you know we almost had a card club? In 1995, when the previous developer gave up, the Maury Point land passed to a new company that proposed a 200-table card club, spicing the deal with the incentive of donating the rest of the land to the city. City Council put 2 measures on the ballot that would allow card clubs and give sole rights to this new developer. Both measures failed overwhelmingly. In 2000, the Trust for Public Lands outbid yet another optimistic developer, buying the whole parcel for $3.3 million. They sold it to the National Park Service, which eventually transferred it to the GGNRA. The whole Maury Point saga spanned nearly 30 years, 1973 to May of 2000, when the acquisition by GGNRA was dedicated. In 1972, Challenge Development Company proposed Rockaway Highlands, an 805 condominium complex on Cattle Hill, 323 acres of steep hills and ridges west of the end of Fassler Avenue. They claimed an improved, innovative approach, cluster housing, so overall density would be low, leaving 80% open space, with single and multi-story condos and some pole houses on stilts among trees on steep hillsides with no grading. A city planner praised the approach, saying, quote, "This is what the Hillside Preservation District is all about," unquote. Not everyone agreed. A citizens group named United Citizens of Pacifica formed in response. Can you imagine traffic of 2,000 people dumping onto Fassler Avenue? A referendum called by the city was rejected by a 4-1 margin. The area fell under the HPD ordinance, and perhaps because of this and the vote margin, no revisions were proposed. In 1989, Alcoa Corporation, the owner of the development company, donated the land to the city. Although there were legal complications, the donation finally went through, and in 2005 the land became part of the GGNRA. In the late 1970s, a development of 3,500 homes was proposed for Sweeney Ridge. Proponents tried to argue that homes would lead to increased tax revenue, but a study by the city of Palo Alto challenged this, concluding that taxes did not pay for increased city surfaces. The balance was shifting. In 1968, federal and county funds had purchased 18 acres to protect the Portola site. Environmental concerns were increasingly important. The city's Hillside Preservation District Ordinance, new in 1972, loomed over the plans for this site. The nearby Cattle Hill project had been rejected in 1975. In 1978, the newly formed Pacificans United to Save Our Hills confronted the developer, and the initial plan was quickly reduced to 1,500, with a donation of 80% of the land to open space. Congressman Leo Ryan, a proponent of including Sweeney Ridge in the GGNRA, was killed in Jonestown, Guyana in 1978, and Congress actively pushed Ryan's plans forward to honor him. Local and regional political support grew. President Carter signed the bill in 1981, 3 days before the end of his term. President Ronald Reagan's anti-environment Interior Secretary James Watt tried to prevent the purchase of Sweeney Ridge, although the funds had already been authorized by Congress. In May of 1984, after Watt was replaced by Clark, the land was dedicated as part of the GGNRA. Look closely, and you can see Gaspar de Portola himself, looking out from the site where Europeans first saw San Francisco Bay. Devil's Slide had been a geological challenge since the days of the Ocean Shore Railroad, and continued after Highway 1 was built in 1937. Talk of moving the road inland from the slide began in the 1950s, and by the 1980s was serious. Dolger owned considerable land in the area and planned 10,000 homes in Montera and South. In 1985, the Sierra Club was joined by citizens groups, the Committee for Permanent Repair of Highway 1 and the Committee for Green Foothills, in a lawsuit to stop Caltrans from moving Highway 1 to go through McNee Ranch State Park. Although the lawsuit failed, the protracted legal battle delayed any action from 1985 to 1993. Coastsiders to the south of Pacifica rejected large-scale development, voting down Measure D in 1992. Caltrans proposed to replace the stretch of Highway 1 over Devil's Slide with an inland bypass over the low point in the Montera Mountain Ridge with large cuts and fills and 5 bridges. A tunnel option had initially been included in studies by Caltrans with the county, but had been dropped. The city of Pacifica had requested all documents about the tunnel alternatives from Caltrans going back 20 years, but had been stonewalled. By 1995, the bypass had wide support, pushed by Caltrans as the only realistic alternative. The bypass was supported by business and construction interests on the coast side, endorsed by the county, and eventually by the city. But persistent sleuthing by Pacifica resident Mitch Reed turned the tide, obtaining documents that revealed the tunnel option had been dropped not because of feasibility, but cost alone. Public pressure forced an expert review of the tunnel option independent of Caltrans. Concurrently, a signature campaign got Measure T on the ballot in the fall of 1996. The new tunnel report was released only a month before the vote. It was a bombshell, confirming the feasibility of a tunnel at a cost comparable to the bypass. Public support grew, the city council and the county flipped. Measure T passed with a 3-1 margin. It required that no option except a tunnel could be considered without another public vote. The last hurdle was funding, and avoiding red-legged frog habitat. Senator Boxer facilitated federal emergency funding. Groundbreaking was on May 2005, and dedication of the finished tunnel was March 2013. The city proposed to change the zoning of these 20 acres from planned units to low density, allowing only 176 single-family houses instead of 883 multifamily units. A developer from San Francisco proposed the Cliffs. There would be a stairway down to the beach, and the homes were to be positioned back from the 140-foot cliff and to be, quote, well built with chimneys, roofs, and decorative trim firmly tied, unquote, because the area is 1/2 mile from the San Andreas Fault. The group Friends of Pacifica had been influential in electing pro-environment council members who negotiated a density swap under the recent Density Transfer Ordinance that allowed privately owned open land to be exchanged for development rights in a less sensitive parcel elsewhere. The developer in this case was allowed higher density than technically allowed on 48 acres that they also owned called View Ridge near Skyline Boulevard, thus preserving the northern dunes. This agreement changed zoning, and zoning is part of the general plan, so this required a public vote, which passed easily. This is an example where all parties worked well together: city government, the developers, and citizen activists. This one is ongoing and unresolved. A plan for 60 units on the entire site spurred the formation of the Citizens Committee to Save the Fish and Bowl in 1996. The proposal did not move forward, and in 1998, an effort was made to include the area in the GGNRA boundary study for potential eventual acquisition, but objections by the owner foiled this. A scaled-down plan for 43 units, allowed by the medium-density zoning, was proposed but only for the bowl. City planning now required an environmental impact report. Facing this and strong pushback by the CSFB, the second owner bowed out and another took over. When the 43-unit plan was approved by the city, CSFB appealed the city's decision to the Coastal Commission, where the case was determined to have substantive issues. The litigious owner then filed lawsuits against the city, which had approved the plan, city council members, and the Coastal Commission. The 2002 lawsuit against the CCC lost on appeal in 2005, and in 2006 the coastal development permit was officially denied. Currently, in 2021, the Fish and Bowl are separately owned sets of parcels. 2 project plans for the bowl are before the planning department but not yet complete. One, a 4-unit apartment building, and the other for 20 residences. Parcels are now on the market for homes in the Fish. Pedro Point Headlands was a proposal in 1972 for almost 1,200 houses on land outside city limits. The city would have had to annex the land and provide full city services, including educational and water obligations. This plan was not well received by the city and was rejected the same year. Opponents said it would negatively affect the quality of life of Pacificans. Planners argued that there was, quote, no compelling reason to encourage major population growth of our city, unquote, and that providing services to this area would be too expensive. In rebuttal, developers argued this was not true, as theirs was a modern, efficient plan requiring less sewers and streets than a normal development. Nevertheless, the plan and an appeal were declined by the council, and little happened for some time, although perhaps a revised proposal for 200 units in the early 90s. In 1992, Peninsula Open Space Trust, POST, and the newly formed Pacifica Land Trust reached an agreement for a phased purchase. The California Coastal Conservancy provided some funds which qualified for a federal matching grant. The purchase was complete about 1995, and the Land Trust has been the steward of the San Pedro Headlands ever since. We are near the end. We didn't find complete documentation on all proposals at Gypsy Hill, but it's too dramatic to skip. In 1972, 2 18-story apartment towers were proposed and seemed to be moving forward. This image of the developers showing off their scale model of the towers was too fuzzy to see, so I've added my own, but the scale is accurate. The plan was for 476 apartments, plus 24 penthouses, plus 24 townhouses, plus a restaurant, shops, and parking. The City Planning Commission approved the plan, and City Council approved it unanimously. There were traffic access problems, and the city's approval required an additional access road down to Eureka Square. Maybe this is what killed it. The property was sold, and the next we hear is in 1998 when a research and office park was proposed with 6 two-story office buildings and a 750-car parking lot on 22 acres. Can you imagine Sharp Park Road with an additional 750 cars coming and going at rush hour, even with traffic lights? The trail on this one ends here. Of course, there were many more projects we could have shown, but we have to stop somewhere. And this is a good time to say that even the Pacifica Tribune occasionally made a typo. All newspapers make mistakes, and we may have made some too in this presentation. If you have comments or think you saw errors, we'd like to hear from you. Thank you for your attention. I hope you learned some history of the critical relationship between the City of Pacifica and its citizens in the development and protection of our iconic and irreplaceable open space. We saw plans where the city relinquished open space, and some where they actively saved it. We saw public ballot measures reject plans that had been approved. We saw citizen activism intercede and legal involvement by the Coastal Commission when the city approved controversial development. We saw plans approved, inadvertently or intentionally, that disregard provisions of the Hillside Preservation District, or that allow variances in zoning specified in the general plan. Both of these are permitted, but should be rare with careful consideration. Those laws are there for a reason. And we saw the city negotiate in good faith towards compromise that respected citizen opposition, saved open space, and facilitated the developers' goals. Win, win, win. A few personal conclusions. The birth of the HPD happened during a time of many challenges to open space. Its relevance and efficacy are still important today. We should not change that ordinance casually. We can't count on city officials to make decisions in the public interest all the time. There is an essential role for public oversight. The tunnel is already a famous landmark. Let's remember that Caltrans advocated a bypass inappropriately by burying relevant objective assessments. Precedent is important. Sometimes exceptions are necessary, but they also become loopholes. GGNRA lands in Pacifica are open spaces that people come from far around to enjoy. Indeed, only GGNRA or parklands are perpetually protected. Lots of present open space could be threatened if our HPD is weakened or waived. Community engagement matters. We can preserve open space. Housing does not have to sacrifice open space.